Okay, we should get started. Welcome to our first community research seminar of the year. Right? You're used to seeing Professor Louie here. In case you don't know me, I'm Aldine Fentiman. I'm going to be the person doing the coordination this year of the seminar program. We've got just a couple of housekeeping things to mention. Number one, this is being broadcast, is my understanding, and so it is being recorded, just so you know that. There is a sign-in sheet here. We've got the syllabus for the course. The syllabus says you should, in order to get a passing grade for this class, you need to attend at least 7 of these seminars. I hope they're so good that you want to come to every single one of them, but the sign-up sheet is here so that you can document that you did attend.
Where will the failing grade or passing grade of faculty be recorded?
In your annual review.
Okay, one of the things that I have passed out, I think all of you have a copy of it, is this announcement of the ASEE Illinois-Indiana section conference will be held next March right here at Purdue. I know some of you are already involved with this. Abstracts are due September 15th. I encourage you to write an abstract, to get involved with this conference. It's a tremendous professional development opportunity, and it's right here in our own backyard. You don't even have to go any place to do it. So please do think about getting involved in it. Snacks here, help yourself. There is a list for people to sign up to provide snacks in the for the coming seminar. So please do that. I think that's a list of housekeeping things. Do you have any questions for me about the seminar? Oh, okay, you know where to find me. Some questions come up later, right? So, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today. She got her bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Princeton. She got a master's and her PhD in engineering and public policy from Carnegie Mellon. From there, she did a Clayton postdoctoral fellow in industrial ecology at Princeton, went on to do a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the Environmental Protection Agency, and then went on to Smith College, where she has an NSF Career Award in Critical Pedagogies and Engineering Education, and was a founding faculty member of the Picker Engineering Program there at Smith. In 2013, she moved over to the National Science Foundation as the Program Director for Engineering Education in the Engineering Directorate, and from there on to Virginia Tech, where she's Professor of Engineering Education, and last year she was the interim head of the Department of Engineering Education there at Virginia Tech. And as of July 1, the Kamyar Haghighi head of School of Engineering Education here at Purdue. So Donna Riley is going to talk to us about what's ahead. Thank you.
All right, I just realized there's a clicker here, so I'm going to try to make that happen so I can walk around a little bit. See if that works. Ooh, maybe. Oh, it works! Yay! All right. Hi, everybody. So, how many of you are new like me? Excellent. Oh, that's a large number. That's like a third of the room. That's kind of exciting. So, raise your hands again. For those of you that aren't new, locate someone who is new, and maybe we can try that because there's some of you are all near each other. So you spread out a little bit because we're going to do a little kind of get to know each other exercise, so it might be good to meet people you don't know. So try to ask someone you don't know. So this is our first week. It's Thursday already. It's been a long week for me. I came in this morning and thought it was Monday. I was really confused. So, but share something that's happened this week that was meaningful in some way. It's the start of a new class. It started with an eclipse. Something meaningful that happened this week. It could be related to Purdue. It could be unrelated to Purdue. Just find a neighbor and share something meaningful. 3 minutes. Awesome. Meaningful that the whole group has just got to hear. Yeah.
We were kind of wondering today if Professor Odin would be willing to co-advise this year. And my co-hosts were wondering, and the answer is yes, so if you have your hopes high.
That's meaningful. Anyone else? Something poignant and weighty that you heard? You want to share with the group? Anybody have an eclipse story? What's the eclipse story?
Sure. So I don't tell my boss, but I planned to be from work on Monday. So we did drive down to Kentucky since I wasn't teaching. I didn't have any classes or meetings or other commitments Monday. But the kids and the kids had their homework packets of the work they were supposed to be doing in class that they needed to make up since they were missing class. And so when we got there, and it was getting close to the actual eclipse, we said, okay, just push aside all of that in-class learning. Let's actually be scientists and look at what's happening. Every 10 minutes, write down a picture of what you see and how the sun is changing. And so just that shift in learning.
Anyone else want to share something meaningful? You're all very quiet.
Sure,
Yes.
the darker side of the apocalypse story.
Yes.
Afterwards, the traffic apocalypse getting back. That was something else. It took 4 hours longer to get back than it took to get to where we went. So it was we were stuck in traffic for. I didn't know traffic would be that bad on such a large scale. It just didn't even. It was like it was in the movies when there's aliens invading. Everyone's trying to get out of the city. It was pretty wild. So that was a learning experience for me.
Nice. Did you meet other people? Did you I'm from LA, so I know about traffic experience. When it's really bad, people get out of their cars and they socialize. You kind of get something like that.
Not a lot. A lot of people were so kind of shell-shocked by how bad it was that they just weren't very social.
Well, and I thought it was awesome that Purdue, made the new people on campus not feel so bad because they made the people returning feel just as clueless about the roads.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Although the construction does that too, right? It's kind of all one thing. All right. So Dean loaned me her slides from last year, so these seem familiar. I borrowed, because I wanted to just reference back a little bit about what's been going on. So Dean let us know a year ago that our world was about to change a lot, right? There are a lot of changes at Purdue, a lot of changes nationally and internationally. And so basically, these changes have mostly taken place, right? There is now a new school head here. We have a new dean. How many of you have met the new dean or read about the new dean? Right. So the new dean's making the rounds. You will hopefully get a chance to interact with him over as he's doing a listening tour and trying to visit lots of things, including our classes and so on. So he'll be visiting us at various times and learning more about us as he learns about the whole college. We have new leaders in Indiana and nationally that are implementing new priorities, and so that's going to affect us. And I think we're still at a place where we're seeing that unfold. We're going to learn about the 2018 budget soon enough. That's going to change expectations for engineering education and how we respond. So our community continues to change. So last year we told a story about we're the center of the universe. And about 10 years ago, we had a small and elite group of 4 schools that had engineering education PhD programs, and we've been growing that with ASU, Ohio State, and Michigan coming online. I think Ohio State's still waiting on approval from Ohio, but both Michigan and ASU have official programs on the books at this point, and we have Cincinnati expressing interest in a PhD program. So we continue to grow, which is exciting, and there's inquiries all the time about folks that are starting programs, not necessarily PhD programs, but research clusters and centers and so on continue to emerge, which is great. The opportunities continue to expand. For those of you that are thinking about jobs, I get things, I'll be sharing all the things I get about job opportunities for postdocs and faculty positions and so on. So that's exciting. I wanted to take a minute to thank Audine for the work that she did over the last year. And she's done a great job, and her priorities, I wanted to revisit them. These are basically done, right? So smooth transition, and that is really on Audine. She made it easy for me to step into the role, and she continues to help me. What do I need to say at this first seminar? Oh, let me help you. So it's great. And really, it has made things a lot smoother, and I'm really appreciative of that. She kept all our programs running efficiently over the last year and being effective at what we do, and has made sure that we maintain a leading role in the field. And she did a lot of work really preparing us as a group for a new leader to come in from, and I'm the first one from outside, which is an interesting and important difference when you think about the previous leaders that we've had here. They knew Purdue, and I am learning about Purdue, and I was just this morning I was in the provost's orientation for new school heads, department heads, and I learned some things I didn't know. So there's no standard form for faculty reporting. I didn't know this. It's good that I know this now. So things like that. But it's been a good smooth transition. So thank you for that. I've been thinking about my priorities. This is a bit of a long list, but the big thing that I see that I actually kind of didn't expect was the need for us to really move to a steady state and sustainable school operations. So both Kamyar and David were working in startup mode, and because David was building a new building, there's been some things that are still on the plate for an administrator to do, which is kind of boring work, not very glamorous work, but certainly keeping things running, but also thinking about our budget and how to make that a sustainable process. I know that it probably isn't the most exciting thing, but it is something that needs to be done, and aligning our budget with the priorities that we have strategically, and just thinking about how we can move to steady state operation. And then also thinking about development in this regard. So what kinds of fundraising do we need to do to make sure that we really are on a strong foothold financially, and what kinds of new initiatives we need to raise money for at this juncture, right? It was a building last time, and what's the next thing? The other thing that sort of came on my radar is It's a faculty. It was a faculty-related item, but I think it applies to everybody in the school. Which was they do a faculty survey called Coach, and I don't know what the acronym stands for. Maybe someone else can fill me in, but it's a survey in higher education of faculty experience in their unit and on their campus. And one of the things that jumped out on our Coach survey was concerns about what they called balance in the survey, but might be better spoken about as kind of a holistic approach to one's life, right? One's work and life together. Because if you talk about balance, you just are, if all you worry about is balance, you can have two very heavy things. Pretty soon you're falling apart. But thinking about how we structure our work so that it is sustainable and so that it is healthy and holistic, and thinking about that as a community is something I want to keep at the forefront of what we do, and that is important, I think, for grad students because you see, as with parenting, where they tell parents like, don't worry about what you tell your kids because they're going to do whatever they see you doing. Don't worry that they don't do what you say because they're going to do what you do. So it's the same thing where I have heard from grad students saying, I don't want a faculty career because it just seems so impossible. And so I want to do what I can to make the school something where grad students aspire to faculty careers because we want to build careers that are worth having. So, not that they aren't worth having now, but you know what I mean. So that's something I have on my plate to think about. And then we one of the things that has been really wonderful to step into as a new person at Purdue is that we have a really lovely strategic compass document that was written some time ago, 2009, 8, and it expresses very beautifully 4 goals for the school, and I'll talk about that a little bit today because it really is more timeless than I think maybe the authors realized when they wrote it. Right? So it's a really nice document, and so I've been thinking about updating not the 4 goals, but rather the implementation plan, the sort of to-do list that's under each of the 4 goals, and thinking about kind of a 1-year time frame and a 3-year time frame for us as a unit. And so far, the faculty had the opportunity to talk about that at our advance, and which is a retreat for those of you that are new. There's been some discussion about you don't always want to be going backwards. So it's an advance instead of a retreat. But we're going to have both in my in my time here. I hope that we will do some advancing and some retreating because I think that reflection time and that time to sort of back off is important. Talking about balance, right? We can, even strategically speaking in military terms, you don't only advance, you also retreat, right? So anyway. So I want to have the opportunity to talk about this with all the different stakeholders in the school, right? So while faculty have had their first go at it already, the first staff meeting will be talking about what's sort of on the plate for implementation. And I want to talk with grad students, so this is a space, but I also want to have a social time with grad students at least once a semester. So that's going to happen, whether it's, I'm interested in your input, pizza, pub time, I don't know, you tell me, lunch, I don't know, what's useful, what do you want, and I will show up. And we can have a time to talk about this and other things. But I'll talk a little bit about where we're at with that so far. And then there's this, we're at this really wonderful, productive space of thinking about what's the next big thing. Where do we want to be in this new landscape of engineering education? How are we going to lead? So there are various ways that we can talk about this. One thing that I'd like to talk about is I'm really aware that the Engineer 2020 just left us. We just said, okay, you're sophomores now. So what's our next goalpost? How did we do? It's a good time to take stock of how we did with the 2020 goals. And we did better on some than on others. But there's also a lot that's happened since the 2020 document was written. And those goals didn't have certain things in them, right? The Engineering 2020 did not anticipate what's happening with climate change. Didn't anticipate some of the complexity that we're dealing with now. And there are countless other things I think that we could start to really think about if we want to think another few decades ahead. What do engineers need to know? What do they need to know now to prepare them for careers that are going to take them into a world that we surely can't anticipate? So what do they need to know? So that's one way to structure a conversation about the next things that we might do. But also, we know from a conversation that has been around since really at least 10 years, this discussion of what's the impact that we have as engineering education researchers on the practice of engineering education. And when I was at NSF, there was a lot of finger pointing at both Purdue and Virginia Tech saying, well, what did they change about their schools? Nothing really changed about what Purdue's actually doing in engineering education. So why did we make this investment in having a graduate program? So there's a lot of disdain. And we, first of all, want to counter that narrative, because I think that's a false narrative. I think a lot has changed here at Purdue, and we need to tell that story better so that people in Washington can hear it, but also so people here on campus can hear it. And it needs to be part of the national conversation, and that includes not just thinking about how we talk to our colleagues that are practitioners and how we make our research legible to them, but it's also about how we measure impact and communicate impact. And a lot of what happened at NSF related to impact was they would take very large scale measures. So they would say, what's the percentage of African Americans in engineering? Well, that hasn't changed much in the last 20 years, so we have failed. And they didn't look at what's the climate like, what has changed and what hasn't changed. So you can tell a more nuanced story. Not that you don't need to change the numbers, because you do need to change the numbers. And there's a lot more to tell about the story. So how do we create measures that say, people have changed certain things about their awareness, about their behaviors in microcultures. Some people have been successful at changing things about their institution. How do we tell those stories? So that's really something that we need to do better. And if you look to, my interest is in looking to organizing communities, because they do that really well. If you go to a meeting where someone is working on urban poverty, they have a meeting with a public official. Maybe the public official doesn't show up to the first meeting. Next meeting, the public official shows up. That organizing group is going to say, that official showed up. Did they get their agenda accomplished in that meeting? No. But the person showed up to the meeting, and that is a real gain. And we need to start tracking those kinds of movements that we see in engineering education as we do the work of change, because those things are important to measure and talk about. So that's just one example of how you could measure impact. So and we can be leaders in, I think, both of those spaces, because I think we have been in the real world time of trying to communicate the results of our research to colleagues in a way that they find legible, and we have been thinking about the impacts of our work for a long time, and I think we're well positioned to lead in those spaces. And then there are a bunch of other new opportunities. I noticed that our president bought Kaplan University a couple of months ago. What does that mean for us? We don't know yet. Kaplan isn't in the engineering space right now. So there's nothing that's going to happen immediately in relation to that. But what are the opportunities there? What are the red flags there? What do we need to be thinking about? What do we need to be talking about on this campus as we think about what we could do together? That's important. As our dean learns about Purdue and starts to set goals for the college, we will have some new ideas that come to us about how we want to work with those priorities. So those are things that we need to continue to be listening for and open to. So this is an ongoing thing. And then national initiatives, right? We don't know what's coming down the pike from Congress, from the president. So as we see those things change in real time, we can identify opportunities in those spaces. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about priorities in this first year. So the strategic compass, as I said, is a really great document, and so it's It started out as a strategic plan, so there were it was a 5-year strategic plan document, and the wisdom of the faculty in 2014 was to say, hey, you know what, this is actually a pretty good document. We can continue to use this for a little bit longer. So it was extended to 2017, and the way that I've been approaching it is to go with it for a few more years and to think about our implementation plan in relation to it. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. But so our vision, as it was defined, is a more inclusive, socially connected, and scholarly engineering education. So those are that's the true north, right? That's where we're headed. The mission is to transform engineering education based on scholarship and research. It's a description of what we do. And we have 4 goals in relation to this. First of all, to empower our people. And that is rightfully the first goal, because it is about how we develop folks to be able to do that work. How do we set the pace in innovative programs? How do we tackle big research questions? And how do we grow the community? And we are uniquely positioned to have leadership roles in all of these spaces. So that's basically the structure of who we are, what we do. And the other really key piece of this is our what behaviors do we value? So this is a values statement, right? And these things are putting students first in all that we do, being inclusive, collegial, and mutually supportive. This is really important. I was just at this provost meeting of department heads, and they all recommended that we have some values that included collegiality. This is really important in academic departments. And so I just smiled, because that's one thing I don't have to do. It's done. It's so nice. So, and that really comes out of a department that valued this from the beginning, which is great. Acting with integrity, courage, and respect, and building trust. Achieving professional and personal satisfaction. Being socially conscious in what we do and how we do it. Thinking strategically and striving for excellence. And being accountable. So these are our core values that shape everything that we do. And so so far the faculty went through this exercise at our advance 2 weeks ago, whenever that was. And for each of the 4 goals, what I asked them to do was to think about the implementation plan that exists under the goals. And sorry for those of you that haven't seen the strategic plan. It is on the website. You can look at it after you want to get a view of it. But basically for each of the 4 goals, there is a to-do list of things that we ought to be accomplishing together. And I asked them to categorize which things have we done. Which things can you just go, okay, Jack did that, right? And which things are sort of ongoing, and which things what's not on the list that we still need to do, and what things might be rewritten or updated in particular ways. So, and then I asked to each sort of subgroup, they did this in a breakout group, like what are 1 to 3 priorities we could focus on a 1-year time frame, and 1 to 3 priorities that would be multi-year and ongoing, longer term things to look at. So, and there's a draft, and this is just a draft so far, right? So this is by no means the final document, because we need input from everybody. But this is what the faculty came up with a little tweaking from me after the fact, that in the short term, our people priorities should be, first of all, one of the things they said was, gosh, when I think about what I've done in a given year, people don't necessarily refer me back to this strategic compass and the goals. So I never really think about how what I do when I write my busy sheet connects to our overall goals. Maybe we should be doing that and tracking that better, and really thinking about how the accomplishments of everybody in our unit is ultimately contributing to these 4 goals and our strategic true north, right? So we could be asking for that. Second of all, there's a question about the integration of staff in particular in leadership and decision making. And I think the same thing can be said of students. I think we might be looking at those mechanisms and thinking about how we do decision-making processes. And then thirdly, there's a people development question related to the professional skills. Do we do enough exchange where folks from professional schools are are given opportunities to think about engineering education, becoming involved in engineering education, and vice versa. Do we have enough of a chance to develop our skill set and reaching out to them? So that's those are the three near-term priorities. The longer-term things are, how do we mentor and position our personnel for local leadership and national and global leadership? And what do we need to do to cultivate that within our own house? And then this issue that I talked about balance, if you will, or how we think about sustainable lives, and thinking about our workload strategically in order to prepare people for a holistic life. So the second set of goals is related to program priorities. So how do we lead in terms of our programming? And some of the short-term things are thinking about how we do projects in the first-year engineering program. What's our strategy for doing integrated projects with 2,000 students in class sizes of 120? Right? And how do we dedicate time and resources that we need for development in the first year? And we talked about thinking about the competency requirements that you all do in the grad program. You know about these? Yes? Okay, good. So thinking about are those well aligned? Is our coursework aligned to those? How is that all kind of fitting in the grad curriculum? So it's kind of a grad curriculum question there. And then longer term, there's always space. Space is always a concern. What are our facilities? Do they continue to serve our priorities well? And one of the things we talked about with space is project space for first-year engineering. I understand there's construction going on in people's dorm rooms, and they're not necessarily using safety equipment. So there's some potential threats there, actually, where we really don't want to have an accident. So what do we need to do in terms of space that way? The I2I lab is a great space, and how can we enhance it, right? There's been talk about audiovisual instrumentation for some of our spaces where we're doing engineering ed research. So what kinds of equipping do we need to do of our space for research purposes? Second of all, robust assessment is something that we really want to develop for all our programs. So it came up in the context of first year. I dropped that context because I think we want to have robust assessment across all our programs and be able to tell the stories of what we do really well. So, and then this question of the engineer of 2050 of, we have been a player in defining and redefining what engineering is and what engineering education is. So how do we continue to do that and be doing that in each of our programs? Research priorities. So one of the things that was on the last strategic plan, but we didn't really do, was identifying themes for the research that's taking place in E&E. So what are the defined research clusters for E&E? How do we want to package that and communicate it to the world? You can slice and dice the research here lots of different ways, but how do we want to do that and communicate that? And how do we do that in the ways that create the most effective collaborations? So that's something we'll be continuing to talk about and define. We had a list of what we thought were the big research questions, and I think they were the big research questions when the document was written. But now we've answered some of those. I would hope we had, right? But so what's next? What are the next kind of big questions? How do we refine questions? Can we redevelop the research targets? Some of the big questions had questions related to first-year engineering, related to K-12, related to our MDE and IDE program, so and our grad program. So maybe we want to rethink some of those research questions. And lastly, we have these data resources that are pretty incredible. And we have not necessarily consolidated those or communicated them in a way that everybody can access them. Some people know about them. People that are in the know might know. But not everybody knows. So thinking about how to get those in a form that we can share better. Then in the longer term, and that might not be a one-year project, but we'll see. Then diversifying funding sources is something we've known for a while. Sue Chemnitzer, who was my predecessor's predecessor at NSF, used to say, what are you going to do when NSF stops funding engineering education research? And we were like, Sue, that's not going to happen, is it? So, and it's not necessarily that disaster that you have to plan for, but really thinking about what are the other resources. And yesterday I was in Boston. I was actually in where was I? Newport, Rhode Island is where I was, and I was talking to some folks from the Navy. Did you know that the Office of Naval Research funds all kinds of engineering education stuff? So we should be getting in on that. They want to partner with us, so what can we do, right? Those kinds of things, thinking about other funding sources for our work. There are ways that we need to be thinking about impacts. We already talked about that. That's also a long-term exercise. Yes, there's lots we can do in a short-term year, and Audine's been leading an effort about telling our own story of impact, and we really want to think about how do we do this better. Once we develop good measures of impact, we should be sharing those and helping other people to use the same measures and contribute new measures and so on. And then also, we continue to need infrastructure enhancement for interdisciplinary collaboration. We are always exploring new fields that maybe weren't brought into engineering education yet, that have lots of useful and productive ideas in them. How do we continue to support that kind of interdisciplinary collaboration that we really want to see and is so important for our field? For the wider kind of community development, one of the really low-hanging pieces of fruit was to write a 10-year retrospective on the colloquies. And that could be a guest editorial in JEE, for example. Now, I don't know who they thought, whoever worked on this, I don't know who was supposed to write that. I don't know if that's me, but I didn't participate in the colloquies, so hopefully it might be someone that did. But so I don't know whose idea that was, but that's an easy item that someone could write. So developing and sharing these impact metrics is, maybe it's redundant to the other goal, but that is something we can start to do immediately and build community that way. And then assessing the state of our current partnerships. So we have a lot of different partnerships we've developed over the years. I think it's time to sort of look and say, oh, which of these have been really productive for us and we want to continue to invest in? Are there some that we can sort of prune because they've kind of lived out their useful life? Are there new things that we should be exploring regionally, nationally, globally, and so on? There was an idea from the old strategic plan document that was called Pathfinder Books. So it was an idea that we would distribute a bunch of books that would tell people about engineering education research findings. And someone said, well, maybe we should do things that are more social media oriented. And someone brought up the Inspire Gift Guide as a type of strategy where you have a media tool, basically, that folks are interested in. It has something very tangible that the public can relate to. How can we take engineering education research findings and package them in that kind of way? How do we behave as public intellectuals in the sort of broader media space? I know a couple people are doing podcasts. Ruth's podcast is getting going. Is it up yet? Is it coming?
No, it's not up yet.
So Ruth has a podcast that's about to get going, and I think, are there others? I feel like there was more, but so we're working on the podcast space. We talked about a professional development academy. These come and go over time. They're always needed. And to really think about where can we have a foothold and a niche in that space. So what can we offer in terms of professional development, either for folks here at Purdue or nationally and internationally? And so that's what we came up with so far. So I thought this might be a good time to pause and have a little conversation about that. This was a lot to kind of throw at you all at once, but as you think about these, what are we missing? Is there some glaring thing that faculty didn't talk about that ought to be under consideration here? What's not there? Should I give you like a think, pair, share moment? You can like chat it out with someone. Why don't you do that? Just take a minute to kind of think for a minute, and then maybe small groups. Do you want to do small groups? Groups of 2 to 3 Tamara.
Well, one of the things that maybe might spark some talk about that I think we talked about all along, 10 years ago, still today, is that where do our graduates go? And we're beginning to know this story, but I don't think it's communicated well. And so maybe there's a piece of that goes in that wider space of like,
Yes.
what are all the opportunities? Like, not everybody's going to be faculty. Not everybody even wants to be faculty. What are the other opportunities for people to come out of programs like this? Now that we're getting more and more.
Yes.
So that conversation of what is the what is it?
And that's a great collaboration opportunity too, because I know on my interview there was a lot of talk of how did Virginia Tech and Clemson and ASU and all of us collaborate. Where are spaces where we can work together? And I think that's one where we can work together, not only in terms of telling our stories of where people have gone and getting that collectively understood, but also providing those opportunities as well, whether it's, I mean, those are all academic category spaces, but the more of those things that we can create, the better. And one of the really heartening little facts that I picked up at ASWE this year, there was a dean at the Citadel did a survey of the deans on the Engineering Deans Council. So he had an end of like 100 deans responded. And some, like 25% of those deans said they had hired someone with a PhD in engineering education onto their faculty. And they weren't all in tenure track roles. A lot of them were in instructor roles or in, dean lit type roles where they were working on, or teaching and learning center type roles, those kinds of things. But that was a fascinating story that ought to be told about where people are, and we can go about that a couple different ways, right? Like one is through that dean mechanism, and one is through our own alumni surveying and so on. Yeah.
Is there a way to kind of showcase how the bigger strategy for the school translates to the faculty level and from there to the graduate student level? So how we connect to the big picture there, or are we doing a streamlined process across the different groups within the ENE community?
Yeah, I like that idea of kind of thinking about some kind of, I can imagine a visual of some kind, right, that kind of breaks this down and says, okay, what do these look like?
So that we're all doing, we're making it more streamlined process.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
How could we capture the contribution of alums, because we have so many alums, so not only where they go, but what kind of things they're doing and how is that actually connecting to for users or any education?
Yeah, and I think that is a big part of the impact story, is where, I mean, that's the whole theory of change, right, of having a PhD program in engineering education, was that we were going to be producing individuals that are out there being change agents wherever they are, and to be able to assess that as part of that. I don't know, Haghighi, if you have stories to tell about that.
We actually have that list of all of our alumni, where they are, and a little bit about what they're doing, and we're in the process of putting it into a website where it's easy to pull that up.
Cool. So yeah, I think that's a major part of the impact, because that is, we need to basically, I mean, I don't know that we have to just for NSF's sake, but I mean, they need to know that was a viable theory of change there, actually producing people. And I think about, I'm the product of an NSF investment in the 90s around ethics education, and they took a bunch of grad students and educated us in ethics over at IU, actually. But we went there for a week, and all of us, I mean, I still see those people in ethics spaces. Whenever I go to an ethics meeting, there they are, the people from the 90s. And I don't think NSF has any idea how important that investment was. They did the grant, it's over, nobody thinks about it. But it had a huge, because they were training a workforce to think about ethics. It was huge effects. So do you want to think about another thing together? Or are there other thoughts on this? Strategic plan? We'll have more opportunities to shape this as we go. But how about the engineer of 2050? Do you want to think about that for a minute? I know it's big, and it's hard to know.
Question, why 2050? Like, I feel like it's
a nice round number. It's the middle of the century. It could be a different year. If you want to pick 2090, you can. I think, it's a year where we think about the career preparation of current students on a sort of 30-year career time frame. it's a way to, I know when they did the 2020 report, it was published in 01, 02, maybe a little later. They started in 01, I think. They started around the turn of the century to think 20 years ahead, and then they didn't publish it for a while. But so they were thinking on a 20-year time frame. So this sets us on a roughly 30. But yeah.
So my personal opinion, I like thinking of the engineer 2035.
Okay.
Those are people who are about 5-ish years old now. They are experiencing engineering education as more and more schools are including engineering in kindergarten classrooms. I think that's something we have to think about, whether it's 2035, 2040, 2050, that we're really not just thinking about what's happening in college, but what's happening throughout those early education.
I read it as the class of 2050. I was like, they're not born yet.
Right. Well, and that's so there's sort of two. There's different ways of positioning it, and I'm not picky about the year, and I'm actually not picky about the title either because it's a little bit derivative of the Engineer 2020 report. So we don't. It's just kind of it's a way to frame what we're talking about. But I think climate. I put 2050 because I think about climate and kind of. As I'm thinking about kind of big trends, that by 2050 we know we'll be seeing significant effects from climate change. And so what do engineers need to know now if we're going to be dealing with a lot of mitigation work? I think that has to be a major part of the story. It wasn't at all on the 2020 landscape, but it has to be on whatever the next thing is. And 35 is close in. Not that there won't be real change happening by then, but it's a... So you can slice and dice it however you want, but you can pick 35 since you are talking about what needs to happen now in K-12. But you could also set it out a little further if you want to think about big. And I'm not much of a futurist. I don't really play those games. I'm not. I don't think we'll all be cyborgs, or maybe we will. I don't know. But it's I don't claim to know those things. So. But thinking about what we need to prepare for, what kinds of scenarios we're going to be seeing. Yeah. So why don't you talk amongst yourselves a little bit? I'll check back in a minute.